Yeah, she's on a mission, keeping our culture lifted. Now you can watch and listen to Tammi Mac. Tammi Mac. Oh, what show was that? It's the Tammi Mac Show on Fox Soul.
Tammi Mac, ay, Tammi Mac, yeah, who that? Tammi Mac, Tammi Mac, ay, so you know it's Tammi Mac, ay, Tammi Mac.
Welcome to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am Tammi Mac. Hey there. So gun violence is a threat that continues to impact African Americans disproportionately. And gun violence numbers have soared since the start of the pandemic. And see, I didn't even know that. We were researching this show. I honestly thought it had gone down because of the pandemic and kind of because no one has really been out and about. But here we go. This country continues to ignore the systemic factors that are driving inequality and violence in Black communities. So tonight, the business of being Black is the rise of gun violence in Black communities. So please welcome the president of the African American Police League and sergeant of the Houston Police Department, Officer DeAndre Hutchison. Hi. Hi,
Hello.
Sergeant Hutchison.
Hello, Tammi Mac. Thank you for having me. I'm glad
Thank
to
you
be
for
here.
being here. Expert psychologist, Dr. Marietta Collins is here. Hi, Dr. Collins.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me, Tammi. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yes, rapper and community curator Amir the Bull Bay Richardson is here. Hi, Amir.
Hey, how's it going?
And Georgia correspondent for Intercept and columnist for Decatorish, George Cheedy is with us on this Wednesday. Hi, George.
Hey, happy to be here.
Glad for you to be here. Listen, the first question I ask every night, it is a tradition of the Tammi Mac Late Show, and that is why. Why should Black people care about gun violence and its rise today? I'll let Sergeant Hutchison start with this one.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And it's a very, very, very important topic to so many African Americans that we talk about the gun violence. As you mentioned, the pandemic has really caused people to be huddled into their homes and forced to deal with each other and for long periods of time. And then you pound on top of that the fact that a lot of families are facing financial hardships. Mm-hmm. So it's the perfect storm for tensions to be incredibly high. And then you add the ease of access of guns, and then you get the result that we have, the high violent crime rates that we have in our cities across America.
Yeah, we're definitely going to tackle the ease of buying guns later in the show. So thank you for bringing that up. Dr. Collins, why? Why should Black people care about the rise of gun violence today?
Black people are 2 times more likely to be killed and die in firearm accidents as compared to the rest of the population. So this great amount of violence that we're seeing, gun violence, is disproportionately impacting people of color. So we should most definitely be concerned.
Amir, why? Why should I, as a Black woman, care about gun violence?
You know, to piggyback on the point that was just made, anytime an emergency happens in this country, Black and brown spaces are always the most vulnerable. So whether we're talking about gun violence, food insecurity, housing insecurity, divestment, so on and so forth. So if we want to maintain a strong community, build into the future better, we have to be concerned about gun violence because, you know, as it was just stated, we are disproportionately affected by these things.
So let's move right into the ease of purchasing a gun. Is it actually really easier than, I don't know, can young people get a gun as easy as they can get a job application, Sergeant Hutchison?
Well, we got a bill moving through our legislature right now. It's a constitutional carry bill, and it basically says that you don't even need a permit anymore. You have to get a marriage permit, you have to get a driver's license permit, but you don't need a permit to carry a gun. And if this bill passes, I think it's going to be catastrophic for our communities, especially our communities of color. But like you say, the ease, we have the NRA that just makes it so easy to get guns, to buy bullets, and we're seeing these in the hands of children, young teenagers in middle school and high school. Those violent crimes are on the rise as well. And like you say, it's just so incredibly easy to get the gun with no restrictions. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense. We need to be doing a lot more of a lot of different things, but giving everybody a gun is definitely not going to make our community safe.
Yeah. George, why should Black people care?
So, gun violence is a poverty problem. Gun violence is a public health problem. And both poverty and public health hit the Black community harder than anyone else. Like, what we're seeing is a symptom of the broader inequality in the Black community. And so we're not going to solve the gun problem until we really get at the inequality problems that we're facing.
So you think it's an inequity problem that creates gun violence?
I think that it's driving it, and it's particularly true in Atlanta. Over the last year, Atlanta's had a 50% increase in gun crimes and an 84% increase in homicides. And from the data I'm looking at, a lot of that is being driven by the pandemic exacerbating housing and domestic problems that are just accelerating. Things that were already there are 10 times worse because there's no place to run. So people are grabbing a gun because it's there. And because we live in Georgia where it's easy to get a gun. Like, we have a specific problem with crews running through parking garages.
We do.
5 people at a time. They'll break windows. 2 people will be breaking windows and the other 2 will be going through cars, knowing that 1 out of every 10 cars is going to have a gun in it. And it's just a matter of, how many cars can you hit in 10 minutes in a parking garage?
And so they're literally, they're going through these parking garages, bashing the windows in to exclusively find guns in cars that they could steal?
That's all they're trying to do, is just toss cars as fast as they can. Like, it's like a 10-minute drill. Can you get through 100 cars? Yes. If you can, 1 out of 10, you're going to end up with 10 guns. If you've got a crew with 5 people in it, everybody walks out of there with 2 guns in their pocket.
Dr. Collins, you're nodding your head in agreement. So you're familiar with this happening in Atlanta.
Oh yes, this is a huge problem here in Atlanta. And from the perspective of a psychologist, in 2020, over 5,000 children and teenagers were killed as a result of gun violence. This is just getting out of hand. This, again, disproportionately impacts lower income communities. If you think about families, you think about children who are exposed to gun violence, they're much more likely to have a more negative trajectory. They may become more afraid to go outside. They're afraid to go outside and interact with their peers. They develop psychological disorders such as anxiety, depression. So this is most definitely a big problem, a huge problem that we need to really work our best to make changes for.
How has COVID and the pandemic contributed to these numbers, Dr. Collins?
I would agree with what George has said, and I think also the sergeant may have said, the fact that we were really restricted to be in our homes. The outlets that people may have had in terms of being able to get away from situations in which there was domestic abuse. There have been more limited opportunities to seek support, to have your support system. So there have been restrictions, and it's really, really increased. I guess I'll say people are a lot, they lose their temper a lot easier now. It's not easy for them to separate and go in their own spaces. So it's been really difficult for people during the pandemic. Things just really gotten tighter for them. So.
Right. So Amir, what are your thoughts when it comes to this pandemic and the guns? Do you believe that it has people lashing out in a certain way?
Absolutely. And I think the pandemic has shown a lot of the country's true issues, the wage gap, people not having access to resources, food, so on and so forth. And to just add on to what's been said, poverty is at the core of this. Better minds than me have studied this and looked into this and see and pinpointed needs that are not met. from, respectable housing, food, community resources, education, so on and so forth. So when you have like a group of people, and it really affects my city, right? So Philadelphia is one of the biggest forces.
Yeah. Philadelphia is
so
getting hit pretty hard right now. Do you know why that is? Is there something in the air that is creating this, you think?
it's such a tricky conversation to broach, because on one hand, it's not rocket science. Again, we're talking about poverty. People are making $7 an hour.
Yeah.
People are trying to support kids. We are talking about single parent mothers trying to support 3, 4, possibly more children on $7 an hour. And it just doesn't work. You need $15 an hour and up. That's just the starting point. And then you talked about dignified living in terms of housing and all these other things that everybody needs. And so when your needs aren't met, you look to solve it. And you do it in, I guess, creative ways, like attacking parking lots or something like that. And, another thing that we need to reckon with is the culture here in America. As soon as a legislation gets signed to ban, restrict, or limit firearms in any way, and it creates a black market. And we need to start looking at issues in ways where we're not criminalizing people. We're trying to see their humanity, and we're trying to, find what needs that need to be met.
So are you suggesting, Amir, that stricter gun laws are not the answer?
It's tough. I won't say that flat out and in a black and white way, because it's just it's a tricky situation. But America has a lot of guns floating around.
Yeah.
And I think just developing a better relationship with firearms, I feel like is a start. I'm trying to do that myself. I've grown up in Southwest Philly, tons of violence. I hated guns growing up. I really did. But just this past year, I got my license to carry for my own personal reasons, so on and so forth. But, this country has such a strong love of firearms that I think, they're not going to go away. So our best bet in this very moment is to develop better relationships with them. Maybe come up with a plan if someone has a firearm, or, learn about them yourselves so you're not so scared. But I do agree with keeping firearms out of the hands of young people. Young people are still developing their minds and decision making. I'm still developing my mind. So I think making sure that young people are educated as much as possible in these areas really, really helps. Addressing poverty really, really helps. Something that kind of enabled me to grow into the person that I am today is after school programs, and that has been slashed by a lot here in Philadelphia.
Oh, well, we're going to take an after school break and come right back on the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul, where the business of being Black tonight is gun violence. Please welcome the president of the African American Police League and sergeant of the Houston Police Department, Officer DeAndre Hutchison, expert psychologist Dr. Marietta Collins, rapper and community curator Amir "The Bull Bay" Richardson, and Georgia correspondent for Intercept and columnist for Decatur-ish, George Chidi is here with us today. Let's check our soulmates. Let's go to the chat and see what the soulmates are talking about here. Incog, hi, nice to see you. For example, outlets like the public library or community center that would have ordinarily been open to sit down and cool off are not available due to COVID restrictions. So tension is building up is what our soulmate is saying. Church of Jesus Herod Christ. Guns are to protect your home and family in the name of self-defense and or rise up against the government. But that requires the police. Does that require the police, Sergeant Hutchison?
What's the question?
I'm not exactly sure here either. Guns are to protect your home and family in the name of self-defense or rise up against the government, but that requires the police. So I'm assuming to protect your home requires the police, and to rise up against the government requires the police as well. I'm not sure that. So
I just in response to be clear with your questions, y'all, in the chat, roommates.
Be clear, thank you. Soulmates.
We on Fox
Soul, soulmates.
But anytime you get the police involved, you definitely run the risk of a hostile encounter. It's no secret that, especially in Black and brown communities, we're more likely to have deadly encounters with the police, especially when there's guns in play. But I don't think that we should be trying to rise up and take over government in any way, shape, or form. Like you say, that's what we have our police force for. It's a consent by those that are governed to come in and do the job of keeping everybody safe and keeping order and civility. Obviously, there's been violations of that oath to protect and serve, especially in Black and brown communities. So there's been traumatic events, but we're trying to do more trust building and make trust deposits into our communities so we can better foster the relationship with our Black and brown communities.
Why is it that there are disproportionately more people shot and killed in those Black and brown communities than other ethnic communities?
That goes back to what was already been stated. In economically impoverished communities, the lack of trust, because we know how policing was started in the way back with the slave patrols and the slave watches, and it was designed to keep people in line and in order. It was not designed to protect us. So we had to transition from that, and now we're supposed to be more guardians of our community, right? We're community participants. It's not us versus the police, it's the police together and how we move our communities forward. But we had to transition. And there's been a lot of trauma that a lot of Black and brown communities have experienced as related encounters with police. But now, like I said, our focus, at least here in Houston, has been to deposit more trust building strategies and skills to build that relationship with the community so we can continue to move together as one.
How can you do that? It's been, it's so devastating. It seems irreparably broken, the trust between the police and the Black and brown community. So where do you start?
So this weekend, we have a George Floyd, Sergeant Harold Preston Community Stop the Violence March. And this march is to bring the Preston family who was killed, a line of duty death officer who was killed in gun violence related to domestic violence. And we have George Floyd, who was killed in front of everybody last May 25th. And you have both families coming together to stop the violence, because both families really want communities and the police to come together and stop the violence. George Floyd was not killed here in Houston, but he was from Houston and he was from our 3rd Ward. He went to Jack Yates just like you did. Sergeant Harold Preston, same thing, went to JY. But these two people were both killed in a violent attack. And like I say, it was a violation of trust when we saw George Floyd die underneath Derek Chauvin's knee last year. But like I said, we can't dwell there. We have to continue to move forward, and we move forward by doing things in our community, letting them know that, hey, we hurt just like you do. We saw what happened and it hurt us just like you do. Because like I say, I'm a Black man before I'm a police officer. I take off my uniform, but I can never take off my skin. So then we start articulating that, and we start articulating that here in Houston, we respond to 3 million calls in any given year. 3 million, right? And there's a lot of officers out there doing this job the right way with honor, integrity, and respect. But anytime that a person steps outside of that, they need to be held accountable. And we need more police accountability, more police transparency, and appropriate police reform. And that's what I'm singing from shore to shore, country to country.
I would agree 100%. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would agree 100%. It's because people of color are more than 3 times more likely to be killed in a police encounter than white Americans, for sure. And so from a behavioral health perspective, really trying to make changes that will impact our country long term, we feel, as many psychologists, that it starts at home. And that's why the book, that I wrote, Something Happened in Our Park, Standing Together Against Community Violence, really talks, about the fact that there was a shooting in the park. The young child gets anxiety about it, and really tries to open the door so there can be conversations between parents and children about gun storage, about gun safety, about what do you do if you see a gun in the park? How can you reclaim this urban community where this unfortunate shooting happened? How can you reclaim it so that children don't develop PTSD, children don't have these negative behavioral trajectories? What can families do? How can families become engaged with the school system, with the government, with community advocacy, so that there can be positive changes and there can be hope? And as a matter of fact, one of the positive outcomes of the story is that the little boy who becomes afraid to go to the park, that they develop, I think it's called a Keep the Peace kind of a program, where there's community police involvement. The policemen start coaching the track team. So there's like an effort to really have positive community policing and positive role models for these kids to try to address it, again, systemically.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful. It sounds immaculate. My question is, how realistic is it when you see a little Black boy ducking and hiding behind the car in the driveway when he sees a police officer coming, but then you see a little white boy running towards the police? There is clearly a breakdown in what the police mean to and for these separate communities. So is it realistic, I ask? Go ahead, George.
Just this, like, when we're talking about this breakdown between the relationship of the public and the police, it's measurable. And it's something that I've been looking at fairly closely. I pulled all the 911 phone calls in Atlanta into a 500,000 line spreadsheet just to see whether or not there was some drop off that was happening during the pandemic. Calls to the police in Atlanta dropped 37% the day after we had a local shooting here. Like when Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed, which was about a month into the protests, people basically went on a 911 strike. Not too long after that, the Atlanta Police Department started to have blue flu. Like they started calling in sick en masse. And that totally destroyed the relationship, right? That was fairly strong between the public and the police here. The day after George Floyd was killed, the National Association of the National African American Gun Association had 2,000 new members. Black people started buying guns en masse the day after the George Floyd murder became a public event. And like, I've got to say, I've got to wonder whether or not Amir's, concealed carry may have something to do with this breakdown, and sense that we can't trust the police to take care of problems, so we'll do it ourselves. And then suddenly have this increase in, gun violence, essentially.
Amir, what prompted you to buy your gun?
I'll be totally honest. It was watching people storm the Michigan State Capitol with open firearms, screaming at, the guards outside, and essentially bum rushing the Capitol in Michigan. And this was back in April. So this was before George Floyd's unfortunate passing and his murder. But I saw the overt racism and the rise of like the Proud Boys and all these different groups. And they've even roamed the streets here in Philadelphia with bats and different things like that. So racism straight up and down was my clear reason for purchasing and getting a firearm. I don't like guns. I'm not looking to harm anyone in my community. I have to push back just a little bit because respect. I don't necessarily think cops help at all. There was Walter Wallace who lived down the street from me. He was having a mental episode. Police were called in, they shot and murdered him. So Black and brown spaces have been under these tremendous amount of pressures for generations, decades. And every time a group of us anywhere in the country rise up to ask for help, demand help, we're met with state violence. And so I can appreciate the spirit of wanting to build trust,
wanting to build and move in a direction of love and shared bonding and all those different things. I care about Black people and the communities and the spaces that we take up, but I think law enforcement needs to be removed from the equation because too often they add to gun violence. Gun violence is such a tricky conversation. I keep coming back to that because something that's not mentioned often is 60% roughly gun violence are suicides, but no one talks about that. You know, it's always framed in terms of like there's gun violence in Black and brown spaces. Yeah. And I think framing it like that is a little anti-Black, and it causes people to say, look at those Black people. And that's never the case. You're looking at spaces that have been divested. You're looking at spaces that need mental help and resources on a crazy scale that is at this point unimaginable. But we need to start implementing those things into laws, legislation, and community building. And so with respect, I just don't think that law enforcement is useful in that way.
I'm going to have you respond, Sergeant Hutchison, but we're going to take a quick break and come right back on the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul, where the business of being Black tonight is gun violence. And we were talking about how gun violence plays a role into mental illness. When there is a mental illness call to the police, oftentimes it ends pretty badly. And Amir gave us an example of that happens. And I have to say, and I know Sergeant Hutchison, you want to respond to Amir, but before you respond, my girlfriend and her husband, their son has some mental issues, and he was missing, in Los Angeles. And I said, hey, I know an officer in Los Angeles who handles the Skid Row district, can help you find him. And she was so fearful of me contacting him because her son had mental issues. And she was like, I just don't know about that, Tammi. I'm not sure, because the police was called on him the last time he had like a mental issue and they punctured his lungs. And so I don't think I really want you to call your friend. I don't know that I want the police involved. And so, Sergeant Hutchison, what is the answer to that? From an honest perspective, should police really have to be dealing with mental? That's not your thing. That's not what police officers do. It's not what you're trained for. Should you have to? And this is a part of this whole defund the police thing. I hate to use the term and the word, but a part of that was to remove some of the funds from the police and redistribute them to mental health care facilities, so that they could then be called out for those calls and not the police. Is this something you all should be doing from a real perspective?
Absolutely. When it calls for it, when it's a public safety concern. When there's a public safety concern, because a lot of times there's a weapon element and it's not safe for our clinicians. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about our crisis intervention team that we have here in Houston, where we have CERT units that respond to mental health crises, and they can go out with our officers and respond to issues where there's a mental health issue. So you have a doctor and a police officer riding in a car together, and they go to those scenes and they're able to intervene on those scenes where they need to treat the mental illness, the clinician takes over. If they need to deal with a weapon, or the scene is not safe, or it's dangerous, then the officer steps in and gets the situation under control, and then they get that person to the hospital. So we have a whole jail diversion program that you guys should know about, and it's going nationwide. We have so many agencies that come here to Houston to see how we do it, and we divert a lot of calls. So yes, if it doesn't require a police response and it's just a mental issue, then yes, the clinicians and the doctors and the people should be empowered to go directly to the hospital. If it's a situation where oftentimes a crime has been committed, somebody's already been hurt, the person has a weapon, then the police have to come get the situation under control and then let the doctor come in and do their part. So like you say, every officer should be trained in crisis intervention and be aware of the mental illness and the things that plague our communities and everywhere. But then, like you say, once it's under control, then you pass that person. They need to go to a doctor and receive treatment. They don't need to go to jail and receive a sentence for something that is related to their mental health issue.
And particularly a death sentence.
Absolutely. That should never be the case.
Amir, you hit my heart a few minutes ago with something you said. You said that 60% of gun violence is by suicide, and that we never hear that. We never hear about gun violence relating to suicide. Those two never go away. I'm sorry, those two never come up in conversation or as it relates to issues in America. And the way you phrased it was that it arbitrarily makes it look like gun violence is a Black community problem. It's a Black problem. And it's very dangerous, you said, for us to phrase it like that, for us to put that narrative forward. And I have to extend that 60% suicide rate to the mass shootings that happen. When we talk about mass shootings, we don't see those as gun violence problems for some reason. When somebody walks into a movie theater and kills people en masse, somebody takes a motel room in Las Vegas and kills people en masse, somebody walks into schools, and this is happening more and more frequent in America, that people are walking into schools and students, we're talking about kids here, Dr. Collins, walking into the schools and just shooting up children, our children. And they don't consider that a gun violence problem. A gun violence problem only means Black on Black crime for some reason. We do get a really bad rap as if we're the only people who have this issue of gun violence. Amir said it so clearly. Dr. Collins, can you speak to that?
Most certainly. What I would say is the key to really preventing gun violence is keeping guns out of the hands of people who would either hurt themselves in terms of suicide or hurt other people. Okay. And certainly mass shootings are awful because, that's when there are so many fatalities. But more than 99% of deaths in the United States are not as a result of mass shootings. They are as a result of daily gun violence, where I would say more than 100 people die every day as a result of gun violence. So certainly that's something that we need to consider, but we also need to legislate, restrict gun ownership for people who may have mental illness. We need to get rid of the gun loopholes. What about the gun shows where you can buy a gun and not be licensed buying guns online? There are lots of loopholes and things that need to be taken care of to reduce the frequency and the prevalence of guns here in America, because there's just too many guns on the streets. And trying to provide training so that people who are going to be owners of guns will know how to use them, will know how to store them, will know how to talk to their children, about the importance of gun safety. Those are issues that are really important.
Let's go to our chat room real quickly. Oh boy, they've been chatting up a storm. I can't even catch up with y'all today. Y'all rolling. Ask me anything. Our soulmate says, yeah, you will need backup. I'm RoboCop. I'm not sure who's RoboCop. Okay. I want to push back on what Amir said about police being removed from the equation. Sometimes a mental health professional on a call needs backup with an irate individual. Police should be on standby. Amir, do you agree with that much?
To an extent, right? I think I think another thing that needs to happen is we can't be reactionary, right? We have to try to prevent things at the root, at the core of things. And going back to addressing people's needs, Black and brown spaces need a lot of mental health aid. And we're talking early on from childhood, from elementary school, grade school, high school, so on and so forth. We can't allow people to just live in squalor and all these different little pressurized situations, wait until they snap, and then, you know, panic or send in someone with a firearm or a taser or something like that, and, you know, hurt them and cause more harm. And so it's, again, this gun discussion is very, very tricky. It's a lot of different things. It's poverty, it's mental health. And, you know, as we discussed briefly, though, gun violence takes up a lot of things. We're talking about accidental shootings. We're talking about self-harm. We're talking about mass shootings. And a lot of these things happen in states where guns are a little bit easier to get. A lot of these things are perpetrated by white males, just to kind of say it frankly. And so it's really, really tricky. But in terms of what happens in Black and brown spaces, there needs to be mental health aid from, you know, early age all the way through, you know, young development. We can't just wait until people have episodes. And we need to build trust, have relationships. You know, the Walter Wallace shooting that happened here in Philadelphia, not too far from me, it was a police officer who was just not even from this area. You know, I live in a heavily police area. I'm sure if I looked outside my window, there's like 3 SWAT cars just roaming around. And so we need to be preventative and we can't just react in the moment. And we have to just start to get involved in our community, our spaces, earlier in the process, so we can try to prevent some of these incidents.
Our soulmate Therese says, so much corruption, even the organizations who appear to stand for good are corrupt because it eventually becomes about money, the root and route to evil. Church of Jesus Herod Christ says again, self-defense against yourself and others. Self-defense is not just against others. Calling the police should be the last thing a person does, says one of our soulmates. And then our soulmate says, Tammy, I understand your friend's hesitation. She had every right to be hesitant. Sometimes police make a situation worse and ultimately a fatality. Mental health plus law enforcement should partner up. Well, Sergeant Hutchison says that's what they're doing in Houston. They're partnering up. You're on mute there, Sergeant.
I also want to add this small portion to it, and that you don't know what officer you're going to get. So I do agree. If I have a situation at my personal house, calling the police is the last thing I'm going to do, because I just don't want to involve in anybody else into a personal matter if I don't have to. It has to be really, really out of control for me to pick up the phone and call the police. But that comes from, like he mentioned earlier, it comes from our upbringing. It comes from how we deal with anger. It comes from how we cope with, stress. All these play a factor. And if a situation is going to escalate to a point where we need somebody from the outside to intervene. So yes, if you can handle the situation on your own, absolutely. Do not call the police, because like you say, I don't know what officer is going to respond to your scene. I ride around in my squad car with a Bible on the dashboard. I'm a praying police officer. But like I say, I can't speak for every officer in the city, in the state, in the country. So you don't know what officer you're going to get. You don't know if he looks like you. You don't know if he's going through a divorce. You don't know if he has mental health issues himself, because we are human at the end of the day. We're human, and that dude could be, or that man or female could be having something going on, and they may just not feel comfortable with whatever you're presenting to them and make them very tense and so on and so forth. So I'm just saying.
I have to say, Sergeant, that's unfortunate now. That's
very unfortunate.
We have to fall prey to somebody else's bad day.
So, but you have a bad day and nobody dies. If a police officer is having a bad day, he might still be doing his job the right way. But because I tell people this all the time, just because I'm justified in shooting, I don't have to shoot. But that's what we've
been saying. That's what the Black community been saying the whole time.
And it's true. It's true. But like I said, don't put the officer in that position if you can avoid it. If you're on a traffic stop, don't argue with that officer to make him get you out of the car to do all of that extra stuff. Just get through the stop and move on about your day.
Sergeant, now come on. Let me take a quick break. We'll be right back on the Tammi Mack Show. Let me take a quick break. Welcome back to the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul, where the business of being Black is gun violence. And I'm talking to my very, 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 very good friend, Sergeant Hutchison.
We're good friends now.
Very, very, very good friend.
Right before she ripped me up.
About how people should respond in kind to police during police stops. But you know, Sergeant, that we have seen that happen. Philando Castillo, come on. We've seen this happen. There is nothing that a Black man or a Black woman can do that is right if a police decides that they're afraid of them.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. So right now, I'm telling all your listeners, survive. That's your number one goal. Survive. And if that officer acts improperly, go through the proper channels to report that bad behavior. And hopefully that officer will get reprimanded and eventually fired.
That never happens.
I've
had so many conversations on this show about the blue wall of silence. Police don't.
Go ahead. Kavanaugh trial, right? You saw the police chief speak against him, right? You saw that wall coming down brick by brick, because now you see that you can't be protected when you do people harm in our community. You don't get that type of protection. Not in this country, not in this day and age. Now, you see it coming down, but I'm telling you that there are agencies where it still exists, but right now we need to survive. We need to survive. I don't want you to become a hashtag survive so we can fight that battle. So now you can call.
Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed.
Yeah. And again,
she was asleep. What more could you do to survive other than sleep?
Yeah. I was just basically trying to say, when it comes to Black toe encounters with the police, Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed. Okay. And that's why so very early on in the lives of many Black children, their families have to have the talk with them. As you said, the goal is for your child to come home safely. The goal is not to try and smart off, keep your hands so that they can be seen. Try and move slowly, let them know what you are doing. The goal is to come home, because again, it's 3 times the chance that you won't, just because you are Black in America.
Absolutely.
A lot of talk used to be around the rap industry and how the rap industry promoted violence. And, people say Ice Cube was way ahead of his time. If Ice Cube was way ahead of his time, Ice-T definitely was ahead of his time, because they all talked about how police treated people in the Black community. Where does the rap industry stand on gun violence today?
Amir, go for it. But I got something to say when you're done.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know as an artist, I always do my best to reflect my experiences. And even with the song that, I'll be releasing in a week that we talked about, one of the opening lines, I talked about my experience at this particular playground when I was a kid. Tensions would run high and somebody would get jumped or shot or something like that. And no sooner as I wrote, recorded, and listened back to that record, I found out about a 17-year-old kid who got shot and killed at this exact same playground that I was talking about. And so, I'm struggling with that constantly all the time, because I know words and thoughts are powerful, and I don't want to be speaking things into existence. But I do want to reflect my honest experience growing up in the spaces that I've been in. I think at the end of the day, art certainly should be critiqued, but we're talking about these institutions and systems, and that's really what we should be pushing back on. And I really want to urge the viewers and the listeners, whoever's taking this program in, to, on their own time, even after this is done, to take this information, to sit with it and educate themselves.
Absolutely.
You are going to be your own best, teacher. So find out more about gun violence, America, the culture of it, so on and so forth. It runs deep. The guns are not going away anytime soon. We can make guns illegal at this very second. We would have a crazy black market. So your best bet is to become educated on firearms, how to even use it. I'll agree with the sergeant in saying, if you have a firearm and you don't know what you're doing, you're making the environment around you that much more dangerous. So take time and educate yourself. And I really want to urge everybody to do that. Art, music, for the moment, I'll give artists a pass, and I might be biased myself because I'm an artist, but we're really talking about institutions. We're talking about, systems that put Black and brown spaces in culture as well. So I guess art does play a role into that. But
absolutely,
I'm always looking at these systems.
We're going to take a quick break. George, I'm coming to you because I know you want to answer that rap question. I know how ingrained you are in the rap culture in Atlanta. So we're coming right back to you after this break on the Tammi Mack Late Show. Welcome back to the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul. Amir, please tell us about your song, or rather where we can find it.
So I'll be releasing a song on the 21st, which is next Friday. It's called Limited Edition. And it's a lot of Philadelphia energy. You know, I'm always, you know, putting a lot of energy into my music. But I was just speaking about how the first opening bars, I was just kind of processing, you know, I use music and art to process trauma, as I believe a lot of artists do.
Where can we find it though? Where can we find it?
You go on Spotify, you can pre-save. If you follow me on Instagram, there's also a link in my bio. You can pre-save.
Dr. Collins, where can we find your book?
You can certainly find it at most independent local bookstores, as well as on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, through our publishing company, Imagination Press.
And Sergeant Hutchison, how can we help your organization? How can we make this like nationwide? Like what Houston Police Department is doing is amazing. So I am going to give you props and say that your department is doing really good at trying to break, or rather build, the trust between the community and the police department. So I thank you and appreciate you for that.
It's all about diversity and inclusion. My mayor is my frat brother, Mayor Sylvester Turner. Our chief is a member of APOL. We have decision makers at every rank and file at our division, at our department, that are very diverse. That's the key. You can follow APOL Houston on Instagram and Facebook, as well as our website, aapol.org.
George, wrap us up.
So we were talking about rap culture and to what degree that might be feeding the gun violence problem. In Atlanta, we have a very specific problem that we're dealing with. YFN Lucci, big name rapper, was just named in a RICO lawsuit or a RICO charge. He's basically being accused by the local district attorney of helping run a Bloods street gang through his record label with his crew that have been fighting another Crip street gang that is also aligned with big name rappers in Atlanta. And we're reasonably certain that a lot of the shootings that have been happening in downtown Atlanta could be attributed to this gang warfare.
Wow.
That's wrapped up in the music industry.
Okay.
It's remarkable to watch.
So the music industry is still kind of wrapped up in the gun violence in some form or fashion, and you will be investigating that more and more. So we'll have you back on the show Wednesday to talk more about that. Everybody, thank you so much for being on the Tammi Mack Late Show. Dr. Collins, Amir Blue Bay, and Sergeant Hutchison, thank you so much. George Cheedy, thank you for being on the show. Right now, we got to get to some Fox deals because I know y'all got some of that stimulus you want to spend, so let's spend it. Let's spend some of that stimulus on the Fox deals. Until tomorrow, it's a blessing to be in your box on the Tammi Mack Late Show on Fox Soul.